A completely black or blank frame with no visible content.
Here in Salmon, Idaho, and he's going to be talking about George W. Hill, early Limhi, Shoshone missionary and friend. So I'm going to hand it over to Terry.
Okay, well, it's good to be here in the tent of many voices again. I did have the opportunity March of 2003 to be with Corps 2 when they were in Washington, D.C., so it's good to welcome them here to Salmon. And as I was introduced, I work for the BLM, and I spend my summers here at the Sacagawea Center or up on Limhi Pass. And in the audience here, we have
a person wearing glasses and a white shirt with a microphone speaks while gesturing with their hand. Behind them is a wall covered with green moss or plant material, with a red box visible in the upper left.
A famous presenter, my daughter Lacey, has been doing programs with me up on Limhi Pass for a number of years, and also she'll be here Thursday. And then Aaron, if anybody's interested, on Wednesday doing a little hiking, he's always anxious to show people the waters, the first taste of the Columbias. So we'll be up there on Wednesday. But my talk is Fort Limhi. And George Washington Hill, friend and missionary to the Limhi Shoshones. Now, when we think about Fort Limhi, we have to go back to 1855, when thousands of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were gathered in their annual, semi-annual conference. And they were assembled on what we know today as Temple Square, but at that time there wasn't all the structures. They had an open-air Bowery, big enough to accomplish, the thousands of saints who had gathered there for that important event. And that day, about 160 members of the church were called to missions to the Native Americans, and this would be the first calls that had been issued since the saints had arrived in Salt Lake City back in 1847. And these calls through the next 3 years would include missions to the Crows, Lakotas, the Cherokees, the Choctaws, the Mojaves, Nez Perce, Delawares, Utahs, the Shoshones, the Navajos, Shawnees, Bannocks, Paiutes, Omahas, Flatheads, and many other North American tribes. But 27 of these missionaries were called and set apart for the northern mission to the portion of the Indians which inhabit the mountain region known as the Rocky Mountains. So under the leadership of Colonel Thomas W. Smith, the missionaries departed Farmington, Utah on May 15, 1855, building roads and bridges, fording rivers northward through the unsettled northern Utah to the Portneuf River in southeastern Idaho. And from there, they traveled along the banks of the Snake River and then going northward along the old Flathead Trail to Mud Lake. Then veering to the northwest, they began the laborious task of breaking a wagon road for the next 100 miles until they arrived at their unidentified destination. And one of the most fruitful missionaries was the son of Ohio stonemason, 33-year-old George Washington Hill. In George Washington Hill autobiography, he records his first contact to those whom he had been called to labor among. And he records, "None of us knew the language of the people we went to. Since I had..."
A person wearing glasses and a white short-sleeved shirt with a name badge holds papers while seated. Behind them is a wall covered with green moss or plant material. They appear to be in an indoor presentation setting.
Learned a little of the language the winter before. It fell on my lot to do all the talking, and that pretty much was done. I also had accepted the mission in good faith and did not want to return with a blank record. So I turned in with a will to try to get the language, realizing unless that I could talk with them, my labors would not amount to much. I had faith in God that He assists me if I do my part. Thus I determined to do it, and it had been sealed upon my head that I should see them in the distance and should know them, that they would come to me by the hundreds. But little did I think that this was going to come literally to pass as it did. For the first Indians were at Fort Hall on Snake River, I went right to work on my missionary labors, where we had camped on the Portneuf River about 5 miles from the Fort Hall. We had just encamped when, on looking over to Fort Hall, I discovered some Indians coming directly toward us. When it seemed to me that I knew them, I told the boys who were with me that there come some of my children, that I was going to baptize them. This created some merriment among the boys. But on they come, arriving at our camp. They got off their horses and shook hands with us, and stopped with us when I went to talking with them as well as I could, telling them who we were and what our business was. The next day, we moved on to the ferry, the Indians accompanying us, and when coming into the camp, the president called upon me to preach to them, which I did as well as I could, which was very poor indeed. And when they called for baptism, I took them to the river and baptized in fulfillment of my prediction that I had made when I first saw them in the distance. This was my first Indian baptism. And as the missionaries proceeded on up toward the Limhi Valley, Shawako, the Bannock chief, hearing of the approaching missionaries, rode 75 miles to welcome them, and was anxious that they should go no further than the Salmon River. His appeal was the same as Chief Kamiwake 50 years previously. His people were suffering for want of food and wanted the benefits of agriculture. Hill would make this comment about his first meeting with the chief and the desire of the chief to live peacefully with these new arrivals in his homeland. As we approached the Salmon River, the chief and myself made a treaty between ourselves, each of us agreeing what we would do to preserve the peace and friendship between us. The chief telling me that the Father, meaning the Great Spirit, had told them that the white men were coming to his country, and he must meet them and welcome them to his country. And
A person wearing glasses and a white short-sleeved shirt holds papers while seated. Behind them is a wall decorated with green artificial ivy or moss panels. A microphone is visible on their shirt.
Must hear them and maintain friendly relations with them. They want to make a treaty that would be lasting. We each agreed to do it in case anything should arise between us. And that is my people and his, and that was not right. No difference what nature, whether serious or not, we were not to take the matter into our own hands and avenge our own cause. But we were to refer it to the respectable chiefs and arbitrate our difficulties in case they should arise, instead of avenging our own cause. This was the chief's own proposition. This struck me as a wise course to pursue, as we were among a race of savages whom difficulties were liable to rise at any time. At 378 miles from their homes, and 1 month later, on June 15th, they would have selected a site along the banks of Limhi River near present-day Tandoy, Idaho. It was in the same area where 50 years earlier the Lewis and Clark expedition came upon the encampment of Sacagawea's people. The mission would officially be called the Salmon River Mission. 5 weeks after their arrival, the missionaries would select the name Fort Limhi after King Limhi in the Book of Mormon. And King Mosiah in the Book of Mormon, just like King Mosiah in the Book of Mormon, would send Ammon and his brother into the land of Lehi Nephi in search of the people who had gone up there to dwell. And they heard nothing from them from the time they had left Zarahemla. Likewise, these missionaries knew not the course that they should travel in the wilderness. Therefore they, Ammon and his brethren, wandered many days in the wilderness. Even 40 days did they wander. And when they wandered 40 days, they came to a hill which is north of the land of Shalom, and there they pitched their tents. And then at that time, these missionaries in the Book of Mormon would come upon this lost colony Nephites who were being led by a leader by the name of King Limhi. Upon selecting the site for their settlement, a sturdy corral was built for their stock, and a plot 16 rod square was laid out for the fort. The mission journal records that a palisade stockade was constructed. On the lines and trenches were dug. Logs were about 12 feet long, were placed in these trenches to the depth of 3 feet, making the palisades about 9 feet high. Gates were placed in the walls, one on east side and one on the other on the west. There were 24 cabins inside the fort, all made of wood and had a neat, comfortable appearance. The cabin dimensions ranged from 14 by 16 feet to 16 by 18 feet. There being no mills, all the lumber to be used for doors, windows, and floors had to be sawed by hand. The cabins were built along the fort wall with a space of 16.5 feet between the houses and timbers and walls.
A person wearing glasses and a white short-sleeved shirt holds a white paper or document while seated. Behind them is a wall decorated with green moss or plant material. The setting appears to be indoors.
By the 1st of August, most of the stockade was completed. And as we see on this picture here, we see the stones in this artist's conception of the fort, but they weren't built until toward the end of the settlement. And we'll talk a little more about that later on. Anyway, the next summer, a mud wall of the same dimension was constructed adjacent to the stockade for livestock. So you had the palisades wall, which was the same dimension, 16 rods by 16 rods, and then the mud wall. The mud wall was built by making forms approximately 4 feet wide at the bottom and tapering them to 2 feet at the top. The Mission Journal tells that the wet clay was allowed to dry, formed a kind of mud cement that was most durable. Then the mud and straw was trampled into the form. A portion of that wall is still standing today at the original fort site. Fort Limhi, the birth of irrigation in the Northwest and the Idaho potato. It was late in June 1855 before the missionaries began preparing the land for crops. They began by developing the first irrigation system in the Northwest. The large canal, built in 1857, is still used for irrigation today. The preparation continued with construction of blacksmith shop to forge plows, followed by planting of corn, turnips, peas, beans, potatoes, wheats, and wheat on about 8 acres of land. Soon grasshoppers appeared in countless numbers and consumed the new crops. The missionaries persevered and planted another 15 acres, only to have the crops killed by frost. The next year, plowing and sowing would commence in late March, and by summer their crops would again be devoured by grasshoppers. They would attempt to save the crops by killing many bushels of grasshoppers. The harvest would only yield 100 bushels of wheat. Lack of sufficient harvest would require some of the missionaries to return to Utah for supplies to maintain their mission. Contrary to remarks by mountaineers that the altitude was too high and the summer was too short, the harvest of 1857 was bountiful. The harvest would yield potatoes and other vegetables and some 2,500 bushels of wheat. One missionary recorded, "It was quite a treat to see the golden grain come into our fort." George Hill built one of the best cabins, he thought, that was in the fort, and he would always invite the Indians in. He busied himself in learning to talk with them in their native language and would visit with them and eat the food that they prepared. Thus he soon gained their confidence and love, and they felt.
A person wearing glasses and a white shirt holds a document while seated in front of a backdrop of green artificial foliage. They appear to be in a presentation or interview setting.
Felt that he did not think himself above them. He told them that the time would come when the game would all be gone, that they would have to learn to till the soil so they could live without hunting. They believed he had the power to destroy the game and wanted to know why he would do this. He told them that the land would be settled and game killed off, but they could not understand how that could be. He studied the habits of the Indians and the traits of their character. He found that by trusting them, that one could rely upon their honor, and if you distrusted them, you made enemies of them. Thus he gained a lesson and gained a lesson that stayed with him all of his life. In his association with the Indians, he was frank. He would hold sacred any trust and never betray their confidence. Thus he labored and learned the language both by word and motion. Theirs was much motion in sound. When they visited him, he gave them something to eat and partook with them at the same time. and when he visited them, they returned the hospitality in the same way. It did not take long to master the Shoshone language and gain a knowledge of the Blackfeet, Flathead, of the Bannock, Flathead, and Blackfoot and Nez Perce. So when all of these tribes come to see what was going on, they could be informed at first hand. He soon became a great favorite among the Indians. And this was recorded by one of his sons, Joseph John Hill. While at the fort, Hill would develop one of the first extensive written Shoshone vocabularies. And then George Hill had red hair, and which excited a great curiosity among the Indians. And they gave him the name Inca Pompey, which means red hair. George Hill records this comment about his red hair and a Nez Perce who claimed to be a son of Clark, of the Lewis Clark expedition. We had a great many Nez Perce visit us that summer, and they all took quite a liking to me. There was one in particular named Clark, a half-breed son of Clark of the Clark and Lewis journals, with bright red hair, eyes, and a thin skin as you would see on any man. He always called me his little brother because I was the same complexion and he was, and he was a little older. He would always come and stay with me when they would be there and take all the pains and manageable with me to teach me the Nez Perce language. I made wonderful progress in the language while they would be with me. And one of the incidents.
A person wearing glasses and a white long-sleeved shirt with a name badge and lavalier microphone sits holding papers. Behind them is a backdrop of green artificial foliage with blue and red panels visible at the top.
In George Hills Jr. And us steelhead fishermen sort of can identify with this. It was the first record we have of combat fishing on the Limhi River. Unfortunately, it didn't end too well. And soon after the arrival of the missionaries, George W. Hill would assist the Shoshones in building a fish weir, much after the same construction as the one down here on the center, on our interpretive trail. And to reward him, a chief snag would invite him to come and go fishing with them early the next morning. And George Hill records, when we got there, there was about 50 Indians waiting on the bank of the river for me to come. The chief chided me for being late, saying the Indians were hungry and we were not allowed to catch any until I caught the first fish. Then they could catch, but not before. So the chief and I fixed our hooks and stepped out on the platform, the chief waiting for me to catch it first before he was allowed to catch any. I had a large pole about 12 feet long for my fish pole with a hook about 4 inches across and a socket to run my rope into with a piece of lariat tied to my hook in such a manner to allow my hook to pull off my pole, and then the fish would hang by the lariat and could not break my pole. The bullpen, as I called it, was full of fish, some of them about 3 to 4 feet long in length. When I got ready there were about 4 very large ones swimming close to me. So I made a grab at one and caught it in the side. But it was so large and heavy that I jerked so hard that I tore him from very nigh a foot. My hook came out so suddenly that the end of my pole caught an Indian that was standing behind by the right side of his nose and knocked him down as dead to all appearance. As I was fixing my hook to try again, the chief said to me, "Look at that Indian you have killed." I looked and saw him lying sure enough. I asked the chief, "What killed him?" He said, "I hit him in the eye." I went and examined him and saw that I had hit him in the eye. I examined him, and I felt his pulse, but he had none. So I went to work chaffing him, but seemingly to no purpose for some time. Finally he came to, and I went back to my fishing, just like a fisherman should do. Okay. But Brother Cummings was very uneasy and kept insisting that we must go. But I would not go until I had caught 5. Brother Cummings declared that he would not help me carry more than 2.
A person wearing glasses and a white shirt holds a white paper while standing in front of a backdrop of green foliage. They are positioned indoors, appearing to be at a presentation or speaking event.
When I quit fishing, and I got a pole to hang them on, and he would not allow me to put but 2 on the pole, and he was in such a hurry to get away for fear of the Indians. So I gave the 3 that I had caught to the chief, and left my hook with him to fish, as it was better than his, and told the chief when the Indian got well enough to tell him to come, and I would make him some presents, as I did not want to hurt him and did not want him to feel bad. He said that we should not feel bad, that he had no business behind me, that I had no eyes in the back of my head. And so as the story ends, George Washington Hill did end up giving the Indians some presents, and the injury was severe enough that he wanted him. The Indians were getting ready to depart Limhi Valley to go over to hunt buffalo, and he wanted to stay there so he could nurse him back to health. But the Indian felt like, well, he should go, but unfortunately, about 2 or 3 days out, because of the injury, he did die out on while hunting. And then, in early May of 1857, a company of 115 men, 22 women, and 5 boys, which included President Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, and Daniel H. Wells of the First Presidency, and members of the Quorum of 12 arrived at Fort Limhi. The purpose was to visit the settlement on the Salmon River, to rest minds, to invigorate bodies, and to examine the intervening country. The mission clerk makes a comment about that some of the brethren were well pleased with the fort, while others of the company did not like the place or the road. And the mission clerk makes this comment: what would have been their feelings if they had left their houses and families and required to break their own roads for such a distance over sage and rocks, without the aid of even an Indian road, as did the first missionaries to this place, and that too without a whine or murmur, with little or no exceptions. Brigham Young seemed well pleased with the progress of the mission and noted, "This is the most cleanly fort I have seen in the mountains." He cautioned them, however, in trading and fishing, not bringing trouble to the mission, to seek to benefit those whom they had been sent. He was concerned that they had come too far from home and encouraged them to strengthen their fortification by building a blockhouse on the bench east of the fort. Heber C. Kimball and Daniel H. Wells urged the men to marry native women. They said the marriage is the tie that strengthens one of the friendship on earth. President Young.
A person wearing glasses and a white shirt holds papers while seated. Behind them is a backdrop of green moss or plant material with a blue section visible on the left side.
Gave them more leniency, and Jacob Miller records. He confirmed the remarks about matrimony, but said we should so live that we could be guided aright, not to take any wife. That would be a disgrace. Well, a young missionary by the name of Lewis W. Shirtliff records an event which George Hill was desired to fulfill the counsel given by Kimball and Wells, and on Friday, the 24th of July, George Hill asked the Snake Chief for Catherine, his daughter. He returned to the fort in high spirits, telling all that he would soon marry the chief's daughter. Someone told him not to be too sanguine of the success of this remark that there. Someone told him not to be too sanguine at success. At this remark, there was a thrill which ran over my whole frame, Shirtliff records. What could it mean? The next day, the fair daughter of the Rocky Mountains came to me and returned the following day and told me plainly that it was me she wanted. The announcement was astonishing. Had it not been for an open window near at hand, I should have fell. I finally rallied and I said, "I am too young to marry." This she contradicted. I'd done all that I could possibly do to dissuade her from such a rash, and I thought imprudent, but to no purpose. She said and she said she did not want Mr. Hill, that he was too old, and that if she did not get me, she would not have no one. And so Elder Shirtliff, of course, didn't want to shrink from his duty, but he also had a sweetheart down in Ogden who he was looking forward to marrying, and so he would consult with the leadership, and so being faithful, he would try to fulfill his obligation there and marry the chief's daughter. But Chief Snag says, well, nobody can marry her because she already had a husband until she came with the proper papers. And, of course, that was a relief to Shirtliff, but unfortunately to Elder Hill, he was too old to be considered. Chief Snag, who was the chief of the Shoshones, and would be touched by the words from Brigham Young, and in his effort to try to maintain peace among the Nez Perce and Bannock, he advised them that it was not good to fight, that the Lord was not pleased with those who wanted to fight, and that it was good talk. Following the departure of Brigham,
A person wearing glasses and a white shirt with a name badge holds a document while seated in front of a green moss-covered wall backdrop. They appear to be looking down at the papers in their hands.
Young's company, a tide of events would occur which would affect Fort Limhi and the Saints in Utah. Shortly after Brigham Young's arrival home on July 24th, the 10th anniversary of the Saints' arrival in the Salt Lake Valley, he would learn of 6,000 troops under the command of Johnston who were on their way to put in place a new governor. However, for the next months, Fort Limhi would continue to prosper. That summer, individual farms would be laid out, and the mission would gather its most bountiful harvest. A second fort was laid out 2 miles below the original fort, and Milton D. Hammond was appointed to take charge. In October, the settlement would increase with the arrival of a company of 61 men, women, and children from Utah. 8 wagons, having been well loaded with fish, were transported to Salt Lake. The fish were caught and also traded from the natives. Late in November of that year of 1857, the mission clerk noted, "There is much movement among the Indians. They say they are going to the Beaver Head, but they do not tell what they are going for." The spirit of peace which had developed among the different tribes and missionaries quickly deteriorated in the next 2.5 months. Contentions arose between the Nez Perce, Bannocks, and Shoshones as they engaged in their cultural pursuits of horse stealing and retaliation. During this time, President Smith tried to avoid hostilities by giving the Indians food. This only seemed to create more jealousy between the tribes. In spite of the Indians' additional aggressiveness, there were still joyous events those last days. Events of Christmas are not mentioned, but the new year was welcomed in. The mission clerk recorded. About midnight, the choir passed around the fort singing a few verses of a hymn at each door in honor of the new year, Friday the 1st. President Smith and several other brethren spent the evening at the lower fort enjoying dance. And on the 4th, perhaps, the first wedding recorded in the Limhi Valley occurred, the first wedding of record. President T.S. Smith joined together Lewis W. Shirtliff and Louisa Catherine Smith. 3 days later, to add to the general well-being, resident Mrs. Henry Smith gave birth to a new daughter. When the Bannocks arrived on the Limhi River in February, they had a war dance and asked the Shoshones to help them raid the white settlement. Most of the Shoshones were reluctant to participate, but the Bannocks threatened them with an attack unless they joined in. On the 24th of February, John W. Powell, a mountaineer, came to the fort to warn the missionaries of the impending attack. Smith dismissed the warning with the statement that it was just another of the man's lies. They were suspicious of Powell and thought that he had started.
A person wearing glasses and a white shirt with a name badge sits in front of a backdrop of green moss or plant material. They hold papers and appear to be paused mid-presentation.
Trouble since he had been buying cattle from the Indians to supply Johnston's army. After encouragement from his brother, Pleasant Green Taylor related a dream that he to President Smith that he had had the night before about a very black cloud with lightning which rose in the north, came directly over the fort, then turned east before settling down in quietude. President Smith felt all would be well, but supported suggestion of moving the residents of the lower fort. On February 22nd, about 30 souls moved up to the old fort. On February 25th, 1858, began with most everyone going about their regular duties outside the confines of the fort walls, except for those who went to the lower fort to retrieve a few items. Late in the morning, the hills and both sides of the river were black with Indians. George McBride was dispatched to locate the herdsmen to try to bring the cattle in. At the same time, a mob of Bandits and Shoshones attacked the fort, leaving George McBride and James Miller dead, injuring several of the brethren and stealing 250 cows and 27 horses. Following the raid, Amos Wright asked one of the Bandit chiefs why they had done this. He said, "We got bad spirit. We listened to Powell and soldiers." Those who were still friendly toward the missionaries either had been bound so they couldn't warn them or were away during the raid and expressed a great sorrow. Following the attack, 2 men were dispatched to Salt Lake to inform President Brigham Young of the attack on the fort. And President Young would raise about 150 men as a rescue party to the Salmon River mission. But a special group of 11 were to ride post haste to relieve the fort with their arrival. And in this party, George W. Hill had spent the winter in Utah, and so he was selected as one of the 11 men. And when he arrived at the fort, ahead of the 150 men of the rescue party, his son records this. When they arrived at the fort, hostilities had ceased, but the fort was still surrounded by Indians, through all the trouble. And when they learned that Inca Pompey had come, a conference was called, explanations given, expressions of sorrow made by those who had been deceived, and some of the stock had been driven off was returned. And so we learn, with George W. Hill and his effort to be a friend and also a missionary, that he did win the confidence.
A person wearing glasses and a white shirt with a name badge speaks into a microphone at a table. Behind them is a backdrop of green foliage. Of the mission of the Shoshones and even the Bandits, even in time of trouble, that they respected his friendship and to be their friend, to be one of them. George W. Hill, when the mission was closed in March 1858, of course, would return to Utah and would still continue to be known as one of the most fruitful missionaries among the Indians for the Church of Jesus Christ. And he would die at the age of 66, and his friend, Lewis W. Shurtleff, would conduct the funeral. So, any questions?
I'll bring a mic around if you guys have any questions for Terry so he can hear you. Anybody have one? No? Well, thank you, Terry, for coming.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank you folks for coming. Our next program will be at 2 o'clock, and that'll be the autobiography of Walter, Nevada. So come back and join us for that. Have a good afternoon.